Welcome back, my friends. We are building the Metro Map project from the YByte Python curriculum available at www.ybyte.in. In the previous video, we saw how we could get the canvas widget onto a window, and we can see it right here in gray color. Now, before moving forward, let's spend some time trying to understand what this canvas is, how we can use it, because that will be very, very helpful when we build the project. Let's start with a little bit of compare and contrast. First thing first, what is the purpose of the canvas? In fact, it turns out that canvas allows us to draw with code, which is extremely similar to what we have already done before. For example, in Scratch, using the pen extension, we could draw on the screen using code. Likewise, in Turtle, we could draw on the screen using code. So in that sense, and I want this to be very, very clear for you that there is nothing new in Canvas. We have already done this before. The way we will draw is also in fact similar. We'll specify the X and Y location of where we want to draw something and then draw it. In fact, that part is extremely similar, and this is important to keep in mind. However, this brings me to an important difference. In Turtle and Scratch, by default, 0, 0 would be the center, and which is why we could give negative numbers to say go left and go down. But when it comes to Canvas, in Tkinter, the 0, 0 is always the top left corner. However, again, once we know this is not something to be scared of, because the X and Y definitions are kind of very similar. X is a sleeping line, Y is the standing line, vertical line going downwards, which means that I'll only give, let's say, positive numbers. So for example, 100 would be possibly say somewhere here, 100 on X, 100 on Y. Now this is just a matter of getting used to, not a very significant big difference. In fact, I would argue that in some sense, Canvas is easier to use because it comes ready with several built-in methods. There are more, but I've just listed three which we are going to use, which is to say create line, create oval, create text. We'll see how these work. But just do a compare and contrast. When we did the same stuff in, let's say, Scratch or in Turtle, we wrote our own functions to, for example, draw a line, draw a rectangle, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, Canvas is actually easier. Like I said, there are more methods, but since we are going to use these three, I'm going to spend the next few minutes looking at what these methods do, and so that we try and understand. Now, really try not to memorize this. Instead, play with the code and see the outcome, because that's the beauty of this. Once you see something, it's easier to understand. So let's go one by one over these methods. First thing first, what is create line? Well, create line essentially creates a line from, let's say, x1 y1 to x2 y2, and I specify this as x1 y1 x2 y2. In fact, if you think about it, this is very similar to the draw line function that we have done previously in the pixel art, or let's say in the platformer. Let's see some examples, because examples make it very clear. Let's say I come back to our code and I say, I want to draw a line. Let's say I say c dot create line. Now recall, C is the name of the canvas that we are using. So I just say c dot create line. Let's say I do this from, say 0, 0, say for example 30, 300. Now remember, 0, 0 here is this corner, the top left corner. So I'm saying start from 0, 0, go 30 on X, which means a little bit, to the X down, and go 300 on Y. So I expect kind of like a vertical slanted line coming up. And if I look at this, that's exactly what I get. Now I can use, some options in this. So let me just try to create a few more lines. Let's say I say, create maybe a line going from, say, for example, 10, say 100, going to say 200 and say 300. Let's say width. Okay, so, so I say width is equal to say 4 and say fill equals to red. Now, when I run this code, I get a line going from 10, 100. Now notice again 10 on X, 100 on Y. So that's why it's kind of here. Going to, let's say 200, 300, which is here. Thicker because I put width of 4, and fill is red, which is why it's a red color line. Now you can play with this. In fact, I'll just give you one more example where I can create a dashed line. So let's say, for example, I choose the coordinates to be, let's say, maybe 550, say 200, and coming backwards at 200 and say 550. I mean, I'm just trying some stuff here. So I suggest, let's say, put blue, And let's say I use the dash option to say, dash is equal to say, let's say 5 2. Again, don't worry about what this means. Run this code, see this, and modify to try and understand what's going on, because that is much more effective. Now, when I run this code, I get, a line coming from, let's say 550 to 100. Remember, X is 550. So that's why I've gone to the extreme corner. 200 to, let's say 200, 550. Now this is a thick line, blue color. It's dash 52. Now what happens if I made, let's say, dash of 1 2? Well, now if I make it 1 2, for example, notice that the line appearance has become a little bit different. Now this is just to tell you that these options exist. Again, try not to memorize, because the best way is by learning by doing. Let's look at the next method, which is called create oval. Now this is a little bit tricky, but again, it should not confuse too much. Basically, the idea is to create circles or ovals. Now the way it is defined, is quite interesting. It wants us to communicate the top corner and the bottom corner of the oval that we want. So if I want to draw, let's say this oval, I will specify, for example, this corner and this corner, and that will give me an oval. Now again, it helps to look at some examples. So let's say I come in here, I say c dot create, let's say oval, oval, say for example from 0 0 to, let's say, say 100 100. Now when I run code, I get a circle like this. Remember, the corners I've specified is 0 0 and 100 100, which is why the oval is appearing like the way it is appearing. Now again, this requires a little bit more thinking, but it's again not too hard. Let's try one more example. Let's say I say c dot, say create, create, let's say oval. This time round I go from, say for example, 100 100 to say 200 300, and I want it to be, let's say, width equals to, say for example, 3. I want it to be filled with, say, red color. Now you can use any color that we've done previously, for example, in in Turtle. And let's do one more right here, so that we can save some time here. So I say, okay, create me one more, say going from 200, so not, say 210. This time around, I wanted to go to say 400, say 300. Width of 3, fill is, let's say blue, and I want it to be of outline, let's say outline equals to, say green. Now when I run this code, right, notice I get 3 ovals coming out. First one, the circle that I discussed earlier. The second one is, the one which is going from 100 100, which means this was one corner. Remember, the corner for this was same. So this corner over here, and I drew a circle, exactly like that, because it's 100 100 on one side, 200 300 on the other one. So it's kind of bounding by this box. Third one is starting from 210, which is somewhere here, going to say 400 300. Now again, the fill and the outline have been discussed earlier. The width is seen. Now to convince ourselves of these methods being working the way they are, let us use another method from the from the canvas, let's say widget. This time round, to create a rectangle. So I'm just going to say c dot, say create, create, say rectangle, and this again wants me to specify the 2 corners. So let's say I did, say 200 comma 10, and let's say, to going towards, say 400 300. Now notice that I have intentionally chosen the coordinates to be the same, because I expect this box to now go and encapsulate, let's say, this big circle that I've created, because the principle of creation is the same for both. Now when I run my code, that's exactly what happens. Remember, I told it to create a rectangle from 210 to, let's say, 400 300, and that box is perfectly covering this oval. So that's the whole idea. Specify the top left corner and the bottom right corner, and you can create an oval, or let's say in this case a rectangle as well. Let's move on to the text. Now create text is almost like turtle.write. Basically, I specify the x and y coordinates, and I tell what is the text that I want to write, with several options like the font, the color of the font, and so on and so forth. Now again, the colors are, I'll take these examples, because the colors, really you can use what you use for turtle as well, right? So let's just see some examples here. Let I go and, I want to write down the 4 vertices of the square that I've just drawn. So I say c dot, say create, say text, And I just say, for example, at 210, say, let's say, create for me a text of say P1. Notice when I run this code, I get a P1 written over here exactly at this point. Let's exercise some options. So I say I go and create this again. This time round, I'll create it at, let's say, at, let's say, 410. So which could be the second vertex of the, this rectangle that we drew. Let's say I also specify the font this time round. Now, so I just go and say, for example, font equals to, now in a bracket, I can put, for instance, say, Helvetica, um, say, let's say 6 bold as a single string. And, I can give as a comma, let's say fill equals to, say, for instance, dark orange. Again, let's see this working. When I run this code, but notice I get a P2 written over here. I can obviously make this bit bigger. Let's say I make it 12, bold font, and I'm going to copy this code a couple of times and just modify some parameters here. So I say, for example, create at say 400, 300, this time round. So let's just try, for example, courier. So Courier, which is another font, and I try, let's say, italic here. In this, and finally for the next one, I just create, let's say, something at say 200 and 300. Now notice again, I'm choosing these coordinates so that they go and align with this rectangle, or let's say this oval as well, so that it also bolsters our understanding of what's exactly going on here. Let's say I try, for example, another font called ver so Verdana, and this time round, let's say I try underline. Now this is just to illustrate the the different let's say options that we have available, and I'm going to change the color also to say something like dark golden rod. Turns out there's a color like that, so I'll try this. And finally here I just make it say spring green. Now again, these colors I've gotten from that the list of colors that we have seen before. But the idea is kind of straightforward really. So when I run this code, notice I get P2. So actually I wanted to say P3, but never mind. So P2, I get two P2s. First P2 is Helvetica bold. Second P2 here is font Courier size 12 italicized. Third is font Verdana 12 and underline. So really this is much like T dot write, except that it's happening on the on this canvas widget. So I hope these examples made it clear that really what we are dealing with here is nothing new. In fact, it's quite interesting because since these methods are available, we can focus on a higher picture here. We will do this in the coming videos, but I hope this has given you a good idea, a good basis to move forward. Again, try not to memorize, try to experiment, try to play with it, because that way you learn much better. In general, if you find that this way of learning helps you, it makes you think better, look at our website because we learn Python programming through such fun activities. Take care. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.